Prologue. 16-year-old Caitlin, known as Katie to all who loved her, watched Ryan Summers from her seat at the reception hall. Her brother had just married Ryan's sister. Katie had been a fan of Ryan's movies since he'd started acting 2 years before. She'd watched them over and over. Meeting him in person today was the highlight of her life so far. Katie's dad had died when she was 2, and she lived with her mother, who was unable to attend the ceremony due to her chemotherapy. Katie and her brother were the sole representatives of their family at the wedding. The two of them had always been close, with Dave taking a much more active role in her upbringing than was normal. He was 10 years older, and had accepted a lot of responsibility for her. As Katie watched, Dave whispered something in Ryan's ear, and they both looked in her direction. Katie quickly looked down, hoping that Ryan hadn't noticed that she'd been staring at him. Of course, he must be used to overweight, boring teenage girls looking at him all the time. She was pathetic. She even knew she was pathetic, which made her more pathetic. She just wished she would have the opportunity to talk to him. Maybe he could see past the extra weight and the shyness that had plagued her all her life. She saw a pair of black dress shoes in front of her feet. She kept looking down, not able to make eye contact with a man, unless it was her brother. A hand appeared before her eyes. "Dance with me, Katie." The words were spoken with Ryan's voice. Either her brother had been working on his celebrity impressions, or Ryan Summers was asking her to dance. It had to be Dave, it was the only thing that made sense. Looking up with a grin, she saw that it really was Ryan, waiting to dance with her. Blushing, she immediately looked back down at her feet, but took his hand and followed him to the dance floor. Looking back on that dance, she would never remember what he'd said. She would only remember how right his hand had felt in hers. She would remember how good his shoulder had felt under her hand, and how effortlessly he'd twirled her around the room. She would live on those memories forever. Asterisk. Ryan had been willing to help out his new brother-in-law by dancing with his kid sister. He tried to put the girl at ease by talking about school and the classes he was in. He talked about the new movie he was making. He talked and talked to the top of the poor girl's head, but she never looked above his shoulders. He asked her questions, but she never even mumbled a reply. After the dance, he thanked her quickly and returned her to her chair. It had been a strange experience. He'd run into girls with crushes on him in the 2 years since his first movie had come out, but never one whose admiration rendered her completely speechless. He hadn't wanted to start acting, but when his father had died, he'd needed a way to pay his way through college. He'd been a first-semester freshman, and his sister, Anna, had been a junior. They'd had no idea money had been so tight until the day the will was read. Everything their father had owned had to be sold just to pay off the debts. There was nothing left. He had been in his university's play just a couple of weeks previously, and a talent scout had offered him the lead role in a boring teen romance movie. He'd immediately turned them down. After seeing their new financial situation, he'd called the scout and groveled as he asked to be reconsidered for the part. His goal had always been to be a doctor. The goal would be unattainable without going over $100,000 into debt unless he took the part. He didn't want to spend the rest of his life in debt for his education. He wanted Anna to have a better life than that as well. He was in the middle of filming his 4th movie. He hated it. Acting for the stage had been fun, but it wasn't something that had driven him. He'd never wanted to be in the spotlight. A college play was fun. Movies, and the girls and reporters that followed him everywhere, wore him out. He would be done soon, though. He almost had enough to finish out medical school, with enough seed money left over to open his own practice. Just a couple more movies, and he was set for life. He looked over at Katie again. She was staring at the floor still, a small smile playing across her lips. She seemed sweet. He wished he had time to talk to her a little more. She was a pretty little thing. He could tell by the way she held herself that she was uncomfortable with her body. She probably thought she was overweight. He disagreed. He would have preferred her to the last 3 leading ladies he'd had. Each one had been more full of herself than the last. He sighed as he walked over and kissed his sister on the cheek, promising to see her as soon as he could make it back to Texas. He was ready for this part of his life to be over so his real journey could begin. Chapter 1. Katie Johnson quickly shut off the stove as she heard the doorbell ring. She put the grilled cheese sandwich she'd just fixed for her 4-year-old niece, Emma, on an animal-shaped paper plate and set it on the table in front of her. "You eat that while I get the door." The doorbell rang again as she rushed toward the front of the house. She brushed her long blonde hair out of her eyes, then pulled open the door. Her heart immediately dropped into her stomach. Even knowing that he was coming, she hadn't been able to prepare herself for the reality of his presence. "I'm looking for Katie," the man said quietly. Katie nodded. "You've found her. Come in, Ryan." "No, I'm looking for Dave's little sister." Different Katie. Katie's face transformed into a sad smile. "Still me. You don't look like the girl I met at Dave and Anna's wedding." "Well, I was in high school when I met you 7 years ago. I certainly hope I've matured a bit since then." She stepped back to allow him into the house. "Oh, well," he said, his voice trailing off. He didn't seem to know quite what to say. The girl he remembered had been overweight, with glasses and acne. She'd also been painfully shy. Dave had asked him to dance with Katie at the reception, and she hadn't been able to look above his shoulders. He didn't think he'd seen anything but the top of her head during that dance. The woman in front of him was very different than that awkward teen. She was still short, only about 5'3". Her long blonde hair was worn in a flattering style, framing her face. She had either gotten contacts or had vision correction surgery, because her bottle-bottom glasses were missing from her face, revealing her big green eyes. The biggest change, though, was in her body. 7 years ago, Katie had been at least 50 pounds overweight. On her small frame, that had been a lot of extra weight to carry. Now, she was slender, muscular, actually. Her arms had that toned look that only came from hours spent in a gym. Her sleeveless blouse had him almost salivating. Her shorts were mid-thigh, but they showed off her muscular thighs and calves to perfection. No, this certainly wasn't the shy young girl he'd met 7 years ago. Anna had been on him to come and get to know her sister-in-law since Katie had graduated from college. Remembering that one experience with her painful shyness, he wished he'd taken the time to get to know her. "Thanks for coming so quickly." "The funeral is tomorrow afternoon," Katie said softly, tears falling down her soft cheeks. Ryan immediately pulled her into his arms and rested his cheek on her head. "I'm so sorry, I wasn't here when it happened." Katie pulled away from him quickly, blushing profusely. She'd never forgotten her only other meeting with her sister-in-law's younger brother. She'd been so tongue-tied and in awe of him that she hadn't been able to stammer out a coherent sentence. Of course, she was sure he got that a lot. "You have your own life to live. Why would you be here in Dallas?" Ryan had been an actor in his late teens and early 20s. Even before her brother had started dating his sister, he'd been the unknowing, unattainable recipient of the only crush of Katie's life. Katie had watched every one of his movies, mesmerized by the soft kisses that he'd always bestowed on his lucky leading ladies. She would pause and rewind the movies, watching the kisses over and over, imagining herself as the recipient. She'd never forgotten the muscles beneath his tuxedo at the wedding. She would dream of running her hands over his strong back and shoulders as he kissed her. His dark, wavy hair was cut short, just begging her to run her fingers through it. His eyes and lips were what killed her, though. She knew she would melt if she ever stared into those beautiful chocolate brown eyes. And his lips. Oh, those lips. She couldn't allow herself to even look at his face, because she knew once she did she'd never be able to tear her eyes from his mouth. She had obviously imagined his kisses one time too many. Ryan sighed softly. Anna, Dave, and Emma were the only family that he'd had left. He knew it had been the same for Katie. Both had lost their parents while still in high school. And now they'd both lost two people that were integral parts of their lives in the last 48 hours, and were going to have to come to terms with each other. He had no idea what to say to this young woman. Where's Emma? In the kitchen. She's eating a grilled cheese sandwich. It's her version of comfort food, Katie said softly. Ryan walked toward the kitchen. When Emma saw him, she smiled and said, "Hi, Uncle Ryan." "Hi, sweetheart. How are you doing?" "I'm okay. Aunt Katie is taking care of me. Mommy and Daddy went to sleep forever. They got smashed in their car," Emma told him. "I know they did. That's why I'm here. I'm glad you came. Are you going to help Aunt Katie take care of me?" Ryan wasn't sure what to say to that. He wanted to say yes, but he wasn't sure how Katie would feel about that. "I think Aunt Katie and I are going to need to talk about that. I sure hope we can find a way to take care of you together, though." "Okay. It's time for my nap anyway." Emma got down from her chair and held her hand out to Katie. "Come tuck me in, Aunt Katie." Ryan followed along and watched the simple routine. It was obvious that this was one that had been enacted by the two many times. Ryan was aware that Katie had spent summers and holidays with his sister and her husband while she was in college, and had moved in with them permanently upon graduation. She was doing some freelance writing, and they were providing her a place to live while she got established in her chosen career. Dave and Anna had been fairly well off, both of them working full-time, so having Katie around to help shoulder some of the childcare burden had been a blessing for them as well. Anna had only ever said positive things about Katie. She had thought of her as a younger sister. Katie quietly closed the door behind her and headed back toward the kitchen. "Are you hungry? Would you like me to fix you something to eat?" Ryan shook his head. "I stopped and grabbed something on the way in. Emma seems to be doing okay." Katie shook her head sadly, her eyes filling with tears once again. "She's having nightmares. Waking up just shaking with fear, screaming for her mom and dad." Ryan closed his eyes against the pain. He should have been there, helping. "I'm so sorry you've had to deal with that all alone. And the funeral arrangements, too. It's not your fault, unless you knew they'd be in a car wreck." Tears were streaming down her face. In the days since the accident, she'd had to be strong for Emma. She'd had to keep her head to make all the necessary arrangements. There had been no time to just break down. Since he'd gotten there, that's all she seemed to be able to do. "Do you know if they had written what they wanted done with Emma in a will?" "I don't think so. I've tried to find some kind of documentation, but there doesn't seem to be anything. I'd like to raise her." Her eyes met his for the first time as she said those last words. Her heart immediately started pounding. She looked away quickly. He took a shuddering breath. "I want her too. I don't want to fight over her though. She's the only family I have left." Katie nodded. "Me too." She looked down at her hands. "We both know that if it came to a fight, you'd win. You have the finances to take care of her. I don't." Ryan shook his head. "I really don't want it to come to that." "Neither do I. I love her too much to put her through that." He nodded. "I agree. Let's just get through the next couple of days, and then we'll talk it out." "Okay." Ryan sank down into a chair at the table. Do you mind if I stay here the next couple of days, or would that make you uncomfortable? I can get a hotel. It's not my house. You have as much right to be here as I do. She didn't let herself look at him. She kept seeing how his face looked right before he leaned in to kiss his leading lady. It took everything in her not to raise her hand and bash herself in the forehead. She had to stop thinking of him that way. He was here as Anna's brother. He was here as Emma's uncle. He was not here to fulfill her childish fantasies. She would just have to pretend that he was her brother. She could do that, couldn't she? I know, but you live here, and I can certainly afford a hotel. If I make you uncomfortable, I'll go. He did, but not in the way he meant. He made her uncomfortable because she was so attracted to him, she could think of little else. Not because he frightened her. It'll be fine, she said softly. Ryan was unsure what to think of her. She was able to speak to him now, but she still didn't look at him. Maybe she just didn't like him. He wasn't sure why that would be when they'd had no contact over the years, but it was certainly possible. People met him and thought they knew him inside out because they'd watched his movies. Movies that meant nothing to him. He wished he could erase them from the collective memory of the world. The two of them had to find a way to get along, regardless. Emma was the most important thing in his world. Katie excused herself to go lie down while Emma was napping. Ryan sat at the table, drinking a glass of water and thinking. The money he'd made during his acting years had put him through college and medical school, had put his sister through college, and had allowed him to set up a practice in the small Texas town of Ranger, located halfway between Fort Worth and Abilene. He'd built a life for himself that had nothing to do with his acting days. Those days had been what he needed to do at the time. When their parents had died, he'd needed money to pay for Anna's education as well as his own. He'd immediately been typecast as a ladies' man, and never had a part that didn't end with him getting the girl. He was glad it was all over. He would do it again in a heartbeat if he needed to, but he certainly preferred the life he now led. He'd have come much sooner, but he'd had some emergencies come up and just couldn't get away. He felt awful that Katie had to deal with everything without his help. Katie had been a huge surprise to him. She'd really taken his breath away. He'd been expecting to see that teenager who couldn't look at anything but her own feet. He was shocked to see a beautiful woman in her place. He felt almost guilty for the thoughts he had about her. She'd been a little sister to his older sister. It felt wrong. Asterisk. The next 2 days passed in a blur for Katie. She was glad that Ryan was there to help. She found herself leaning on him, figuratively and literally. The night after the funeral, she sat in the living room with him after Emma had gone to bed. "What are we going to do about Emma?" she asked softly. He'd been thinking for 2 days about that very question. He'd watched her during that time. Watched how good she was with their niece. Watched how loving she was with everyone around her. He thought back to everything Anna and Dave had told him about her over the years. He'd formulated a plan, and thought he could get her to agree. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "And have you come up with something?" "Well, you're not tied to Dallas for work, are you?" he began tentatively. She shook her head. "I'm a freelance writer. As long as I have high-speed internet access, I'm good to go." "How would you feel about you and Emma moving to Ranger?" he asked. Ranger? She knew that was where he lived, but she also knew that it was barely a dot on the map. "And we'd do what? Have joint custody?" "Not exactly. I don't think it would be good for Emma to be bounced back and forth like that, do you?" he asked. "Not at all," she said warily. "What do you suggest then? Do you want me to move with you to be her nanny or something?" "I was thinking more along the lines of us getting married." At the utter shock on her face, He started to list the reasons he had rehearsed in front of the mirror. I think she would feel more stable. The only two people in the world that she has left would be married to each other and with her all the time. You wouldn't have to worry about finances. We'd both have access to her at all times. I think it would be the best situation for us all around. But we'll be right back where we started from after we dissolve the marriage, she protested. It would just make it that much harder on her. Don't you think that the younger she is for any kind of upheaval, the better off she'll be? Why would we dissolve it? Emma needs us both. He paused for a moment, letting her think about it. We can certainly make sacrifices for the only family either one of us has left. She stared at him, stunned. So you think we should get married, for Emma? Absolutely, he said. How long would we stay married? Forever, he thought. I think we'd have to play that by ear. One thing that we'd need to make sure that we did, though, is stay married until she is feeling secure and settled. My preference would be until she's grown. You want to be married to me for the next 14 years? Emma's worth it. Don't you think? Katie sat staring at her hands in shock. She wasn't sure what to say, or even what to think. How many times had she dreamed of being married to this man? And now it was being offered to her, but only so that her niece could be content. She wanted to cry. All of her dreams were being offered to her in a twisted, nightmarish way. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to answer me tonight. Think about it, and let me know in the morning. I need to be back at work in 10 days. My nurse practitioner can only handle so much of my caseload. If we decide tomorrow, we can get our marriage license right away, and then take a few days to get used to everything before I start back to work. You want me to decide something that major by morning, she said disbelievingly. Are you seeing someone? Is that the problem? Katie shook her head. No, I'm not seeing anyone, but deciding to marry someone I've only met a couple of times is a little crazy, whether I'm seeing someone else or not. Don't you think? For Emma, he whispered, playing the only card he held. She sighed. For Emma. She tossed and turned through the night. The only man she'd ever had serious sexual fantasies about wanted to marry her. For her niece. Could she live with him, day in and day out, without wanting to touch him? Without wanting one of those soft kisses? Without crawling to him and begging for them? She finally fell asleep just before dawn, knowing that she'd give the only answer there was inside her. Ryan Summers wanted to marry her. She didn't care why. The answer was yes, 1,000 times yes. Asterisk. The summer sun was shining brightly through her bedroom window by the time she crawled out of bed at 11 that morning. She was stunned to see how late it was, and rushed through her shower. She walked through the silent house to the back door, and saw Ryan and Emma playing in the yard. He was pushing her on the swing. She smiled and stepped outside. I'm sorry, I slept so late. I had a hard time sleeping last night. Ryan's eyes met hers. I had a feeling it was something like that, so we decided we'd play outside and let you sleep. Thanks. I appreciate it. She turned her attention to her niece. Good morning, Emma. Morning, Aunt Katie. I'm hungry. Katie laughed. Didn't Uncle Ryan feed you? Yeah, but that was forever ago. And he only knows how to cook cereal. I want a grilled cheese. He said he doesn't know how to make grilled cheese. One grilled cheese, coming right up. Katie turned to go back inside. Ryan stopped her with his voice. Could you make that too, Katie? 2 grilled cheeses, coming right up. She went into the kitchen and busied herself making the sandwiches. She made herself a sandwich as well. She didn't often indulge in grilled cheese, taking more care with the types of food she put into her body than that. 5 minutes later, she went to the back door to call them in. While they ate, Emma told Katie about the wonderful morning she'd had with Uncle Ryan. Apparently, while she'd lazed the day away in her bed, the two of them had gone for a walk to a local park to feed the ducks and played on the swings. Emma's eyes were already droopy with her need for a nap. As soon as Emma was finished eating, Katie led her to her room and tucked her in, going back into the kitchen to deal with the few dishes that they'd dirted for lunch. Ryan walked over and leaned against the counter. "Have you thought about what I said?" Katie laughed. "Why do you think I didn't sleep?" And? Ryan tried to keep his voice from sounding too intense. Yes, the reason he was trying to rush her into marriage was Emma, but he wanted her to marry him. He'd never met a woman with so much goodness shining out of her. He needed her in his life. She didn't look at him, but kept steadily doing the dishes. "And you make sense. I'll marry you. I think it's the best thing we can do for Emma." Ryan breathed a sigh of relief. "I'm glad. I was worried about what we'd do if you said no." He was also worried about how he'd find a way to date her with her living a 2-hour drive away if she'd said no. Now, he could date her after they were married. He wasn't giving her the courtship that she deserved, but he'd make it up to her. He promised himself that. Katie nodded. "I was too. I can't think of a better solution." She avoided his gaze as she said it. She couldn't look at him without wanting to touch him. She wasn't good at hiding her emotions, and certainly didn't want him seeing what she felt in her eyes. "Is there someone who watches Emma on a regular basis? Someone we could get to babysit her while we go get a marriage license?" "Yeah, there's a teenager who watches her in the summer while she's not in preschool. I told her to take the week off because I knew I wouldn't be able to work this week, but I can call her and see if she's available." "When do you want to go?" "This afternoon. The waiting period is 3 days in Texas, so we can get married on Monday if we do it today," he said. She nodded. "A justice of the peace ceremony? We need to do it fast so we can get Emma settled. I know it's probably not your dream wedding, but it's the best I can do." Katie laughed. "I'm not one of those girls who dreamed about walking down the aisle. I can't stand being the center of attention like that. I always figured if I ever did marry, I'd elope." Ryan grinned. "So I'm giving you your dream wedding?" "I'm glad." Katie felt her heart quicken. He was acting like he cared about her, but she couldn't let herself be deceived by that. He was an actor, after all. "Let me call Leah and see if she's available," Katie said, avoiding his gaze. Ryan went into the home office to pull up directions to the nearest courthouse. He was jotting down the address to put into his GPS when Katie joined him. "Leah is on her way. She should be here in about 5 minutes. She just lives down the street." As soon as Leah arrived, they were on their way. 2 hours later, they were home with a marriage license and had an appointment for a 2 o'clock wedding on Monday afternoon. Katie was stunned. Was it really possible that she could be marrying the man she'd dreamed about for the last 7 years in just 3 days? Something had to happen to stop it. Katie never got things that she really wanted. Never. Chapter 2. When Leah's mother found out that Katie was getting married on Monday, she insisted on keeping Emma at her house on Monday night. She would have kept her the whole week, but Katie refused, explaining she'd been having nightmares. Katie wouldn't have let anyone else keep her overnight, but Emma was almost as comfortable with Leah as she was with Katie herself. She couldn't let her stay the whole week, though. Katie didn't want to disillusion anyone as to the nature of her marriage anyway. She and Ryan could sleep in their separate bedrooms, with or without Emma in the house with them. She knew that Ryan would have picked someone much different from her if he could. It was just the whole Emma situation that was forcing them both into these circumstances. On Saturday, Katie and Ryan began the difficult task of sorting through Dave and Anna's belongings and packing the house up for sale. There was no need to keep the Dallas house, with Katie and Emma going to live with Ryan. Ryan had already contacted a real estate agent and put the house on the market. They worked through the weekend, only taking a break on Sunday to go and get wedding rings. When Monday rolled around, Emma went to stay with Leah's family. Katie put on a white summer dress that she'd had for a while but never worn, and Ryan got dressed in the black suit he'd brought for the funeral. He felt weird wearing the same suit that he'd worn for his sister's funeral so soon after for his own wedding, but had only brought the one with him. There was no time to have another fitted. Ryan watched Katie come out of her room and gave her an appreciative look. "You look beautiful." Thanks," Katie mumbled. "Where's your bag?" "I'll put it in the car." "Bag?" Katie asked. Ryan looked at her. "Your suitcase." "For the hotel?" Katie stared at him. "I thought we were coming back here." Ryan sighed. "We wouldn't want Leah to be feeling sorry for you that I didn't take you to a nice hotel for our wedding night. Go pack a bag." Katie hurried into her room. She threw a nightgown and a couple changes of clothes into it, along with a toothbrush and some toiletries. It didn't take her more than 5 minutes. She carried the bag out to Ryan. He took it from her and carried it to the car. When he came back, he looked at her again. "Are you ready?" "I've got the car cooled off. It's supposed to get up to 103 today." She smiled. "Thanks. I wouldn't want to melt on the way to my wedding." He laughed. "I was thinking the exact same thing." They were silent the whole way to the courthouse. Katie had no idea what to say to this stranger that was about to become her husband. Just because she'd had a crush on him for years didn't mean that she actually knew him. Sure, she knew his brown eyes and the waves of his black hair. She knew how his muscles looked under his shirts. But only from movies. She'd never spent time with him. She'd always made excuses if he was going to be around, not wanting to make an idiot of herself. He parked and opened her door for her, and they went inside. The ceremony was quick. After exchanging the plain gold bands, she was startled to hear the judge tell Ryan to kiss his bride. She hadn't thought about that part. She expected a quick kiss on the cheek, and that would be that. Looking up into his eyes, she saw the soft look she'd seen in so many movies, and the slow descent of his mouth toward hers. The kiss was a soft brush of his lips against hers. She wasn't surprised by the tingle that shot straight up her spine. She could get addicted to his soft kisses, to that heavy-lidded look. She quickly stepped back. Ryan kept her hand firmly in his as he led her back to the car. "Are you hungry? Do you want to stop somewhere to eat, or go straight to the hotel?" Katie sank back into the leather seat. "I'm more exhausted than hungry. It's been a draining week." Ryan rested his hand on hers as he slid behind the wheel. "For me, too. I'm sorry this had to be so rushed." "I understand. Once we get into the routine of things, I think we'll all be much happier." Katie had always thrived on routine. Having things up in the air for the past week had been difficult for her. Ryan shouldering some of the responsibility helped, of course, but getting into an established routine would make her much happier. "You'll like Ranger. It's a small town. Not much to it really. You can write, and Emma can start at a new preschool this fall," he told her. "That'll be nice." "Do you have a big house?" she asked. 5 bedrooms, and 3 baths. More than enough room for the 3 of us. It's on a couple of acres, so we can get a nice swing set for Emma, and maybe even a horse or 2. I think she'd like that. Emma is already horse crazy. She's been asking if she can ride a horse for over a year. I'm sure she'd love that." Katie smiled at the idea of seeing Emma so happy. He stopped the car in front of a hotel. Immediately, a valet ran over to park the car for them. He grabbed their bags and they went to check in. She didn't pay attention as he made the arrangements, simply assuming that he'd booked them into separate rooms. She saw many of the women in the lobby eyeing Ryan. One went so far as to ask for his autograph. He smiled and signed his name. They stepped into the elevator. "Do you get that much?" she asked. "People asking for autographs?" "Not as much as I used to. I haven't done any acting in over 5 years. I'm yesterday's news. I used to get mobbed anytime I went anywhere. It was awful. I really hated it." They stepped off the elevator and he used the key card to open a door. She walked in and looked around. It was a beautiful suite. There was a large sitting area with a jacuzzi tub, as well as a separate bedroom. "Wow. This is great." He laughed. "Yeah, the honeymoon suite is usually one of the best in the place." "You booked the honeymoon suite?" she asked, her voice squeaking. "Well, yeah," he said. "It's our wedding night. You like it, right?" "But we just got married for Emma," she said. "We're not going to actually have a wedding night." "Well, of course, tonight's our wedding night, but we won't be participating in any normal wedding night activities," she babbled. Ryan looked at her. "We got married to give Emma the loving, happy home she deserves." Katie sighed with relief. "Right. So, that means that we each keep our separate rooms." Ryan shook his head. "No, that means that we have a loving, happy relationship." Katie blinked. "You're actually planning on us sleeping together?" Ryan nodded. "Of course I am. We're married. Why wouldn't we sleep together?" "But, Katie stared at him for a minute. "We've only ever kissed once, and that's because the judge told us to." There was a knock on the door. Ryan went to the door to get their suitcases and tipped the bellboy. He turned back to Katie. "I got the impression you wanted to wait until after the wedding. So I waited until after the wedding. We never said anything about not having a real marriage. In fact, we talked about staying married indefinitely. Why wouldn't you think I was going to make love to you?" "Ryan, I've never." She drew a deep breath. "I've never even been kissed before today. I've always been too shy. I don't think I can do that. Not without knowing you better, anyway." Ryan took a deep breath. Katie had backed away across the room as she spoke. "I really don't want to have to spend the next few months playing getting to know you games with my wife. We're married, Katie. You know, I thought it was just me you backed away from." "I'm glad to hear it's not," he said with a smile. She watched him come toward her as she backed herself into a wall. She wanted him to touch her so badly that she could scream with it, but she wasn't sure that she could hide how she'd felt about him all these years if he did. "I really don't think this is a good idea, Ryan," she whispered. He was standing mere inches in front of her. His hand went up to cup her cheek. "I think it's the best idea I've ever had," he whispered, his breath warm against her face. Her eyes fluttered closed as she felt those soft lips that she had fantasized about for years against her own. He brushed them softly against hers, then settled them against hers, gently nibbling on her bottom lip. She reached an arm up and around his shoulders to steady herself. Her eyes fluttered closed as she felt the lips that she'd fantasized about for years brush softly against hers. He gently nibbled on her bottom lip before settling fully against her mouth. She reached an arm up and around his shoulders to steady herself. His hands went to her waist and held her gently, not moving, just letting her get used to the feel of him. His mouth moved against hers. He didn't touch her anywhere else. Slowly his tongue came out to trace the seam of her lips. Her mouth opened. Her other arm came up around his neck. Katie couldn't believe how wonderful his lips felt against hers. It was better than anything she'd ever dreamed. Her whole body felt tingly, and her nipples were hard. She stepped closer into him. She knew she should break off the kiss, but didn't think she could live if he stopped. Ryan was thrilled with her reaction. Never had a woman felt so natural in his arms. He wanted to pick her up and carry her to the bed. He wanted to strip her and get her under him. But he reminded himself that he needed to take it slow. Not only was she a virgin, she'd never even been kissed before today. Katie stood on tiptoe and pressed herself against him. She wanted to get as close as possible. His mouth was an addictive drug, and she had to have more of it. She pushed his suit jacket off his shoulders. She'd seen what he looked like without a shirt, and now she just had to feel him. She needed to touch this man as badly as she needed her next breath. Ryan smiled against her lips as he moved his hands from her waist to let his jacket drop to the floor. It took all his restraint to put his hands back where they had been, and not let them roam over her body. Maybe if he kept kissing her, she'd have them both naked soon. Katie's hands moved over Ryan's chest and forearms. He felt amazing. She heard a soft moan escape her lips. She wanted to touch his skin. Her hands went to his tie and she worked the knot loose, dropping it to the floor with his jacket. The buttons on his shirt came next. She tugged on the garment, pulling it out of the waistband of his pants. He stood still, touching her waist with his hands and kissing her with that amazing magic mouth, giving her the right to explore him at her leisure. Soon his shirt was hanging open and her hands were kneading the muscles of his hairless chest and shoulders. She pushed the shirt off his shoulders. Instinctively, he knew that if he broke the kiss, he might not be able to regain the ground he'd lose. So he took his hands from her waist, unbuttoned his cuffs, and dropped the shirt to the floor. He put his hands back on her waist, feeling her press herself against him. He stood before her in just his dress slacks and shoes, bare from the waist up. She needed to feel herself against him. She needed to feel her naked breasts against his skin. Her bra was hurting her puckered breasts. She quickly unbuttoned the front of her dress and pushed it down to her waist. She reached behind her and unfastened her bra, dropping it to the floor, never breaking the kiss. It was all he could do to keep kissing her and not pull away to look at her. She felt so good pressed against him. She moaned against his mouth as she felt herself pressed against him. Suddenly she reached down and pulled his hands from her waist. She put them on her breasts. He groaned and kneaded her breasts with his hands. His fingers found her nubs and rolled them between his thumbs and forefingers. He felt her dress fall to their feet and felt her step out of it, along with her shoes. He kept the kiss going as he swept her off her feet and carried her to the bedroom. He laid her gently on the bed, then, for the first time, broke the kiss and looked down at her. She was wearing a pair of lacy white panties and nothing else. Obviously she'd foregone stockings in deference to the heat. Thank God. Her eyes were clouded with desire. She opened her arms to him. "Oh, Katie, you are beautiful." "No, you're the beautiful one," she whispered. "I love your body." She blushed, suddenly aware of what she'd said. He kissed her softly. "I'm glad." He lay beside her on one elbow while his free hand caressed her breasts before slowly trailing down to her panties. She caught his hand in hers, her eyes wide. Slowly, he kissed her eyes closed and whispered, "Let me touch you." He brought his lips back to hers, kissing her more insistently. His tongue invaded her lips as his hand slipped into the waistband of her underwear. She jumped when she felt his finger stroke between her folds. Her hands grabbed his shoulders, not sure if she was trying to stop him or if she was trying to encourage him to keep going. His finger teased her, gently finding her entrance. He was pleased to feel how wet she already was, and gently slipped his finger inside to test her readiness for him. He wanted nothing more than to bury himself inside her, but didn't want to hurt her. His finger slid in readily. He moved it in and out slowly, driving himself crazy as he felt the tightness of her body swallowing his finger. He moved his finger faster and faster. She began panting. He eased back from her to watch her face as she climaxed for the first time. She let out a soft scream of pleasure and clenched his hand tightly between her thighs like she'd never let go. He leaned down to kiss her again, softly, gently letting his lips roam over her face. When she was breathing normally, he stood up and removed the rest of his clothes. She kept her eyes glued to his. When he started to get into bed with her again, she let her eyes drift down to his member. "I'm not so sure about this." He laughed. "I am. You've enjoyed everything so far, right?" She blushed. "You'll like this, I promise," he said as he lay down beside her. He began kissing her and stroking her body back to life. "Remember how good it felt to have my finger inside you?" She buried her face in his neck without responding. "This is going to feel even better than that. It may hurt a little the first time, but not for long. We'll take it nice and slow," he whispered. She offered her lips to him, and he took them in a soft, deep kiss. Her hands went to his chest, and she stroked her hands over his pecs, enjoying his moan of pleasure. "You like that, too?" she asked. He chuckled. "I like anything that has your hands on me. Anything. You touch me, and I like it." She kissed his neck. He groaned. Her hands stroked down his belly. He caught her hands in his and brought them to his lips. "I don't think you should touch me any lower than that right now." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean," she stammered. "No. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm just trying to go slowly, and that will speed things up a little more than it should," he explained patiently. "Oh," she whispered, wide-eyed. "Later, I'll lay back and let you touch me all over," he promised. "I'd like that." He groaned at the thought. His hand teased between her legs again and removed her panties. He settled himself between her thighs, catching most of his weight on his elbows. She felt him pressed against her entrance. She wiggled a little, trying to get comfortable. He kissed her hard. "Hold still. I want you to get used to the feel of me there." She blushed and put her mouth to his ear. "I think I just want to get used to the feel of you inside me." He pressed his hips more firmly against hers, his hardness slipping inside her the first bit. "Like that?" She lay still for a moment, adjusting to the feel of him, and then rotated her hips. "Is it supposed to feel that full? And overwhelming?" He moved in until he felt her maidenhead. "I think so. Hold still for a minute now. It feels overwhelming and good all at once." "How is that even possible?" He moaned. "I don't know." He kissed her again. "It's about to hurt now. Don't tense up. Wrap your legs around my waist. I think that should help the pain." She moved her legs like he wanted and lay still, waiting for the pain. He kissed her, that soft, drugging kiss that she'd dreamed about for so long. She was losing herself in it when she felt the flash of pain. Suddenly, he was so deep inside her that she felt like he'd become a part of her. The pain was gone. He kept kissing her as he held his body totally still. She felt his arms shaking as he held himself above her. She broke from the kiss and whispered, "Are you okay? You're shaking." He laughed. "I'm supposed to ask if you're okay." "I'm not the one shaking," she said matter-of-factly. "I'm just having a really hard time holding still," he told her. She smiled and tightened her legs around him. "So don't hold still." He pulled out slowly and gently moved back in. "Okay? Pleasure shot through her at the movement. Fabulous. He kept his movements slow and measured, watching her face for any sign of pain. He wasn't sure how long he'd be able to hold out, but he wanted her to find pleasure first, if at all possible. Within seconds, her breathing was rapid, and her moans told him she was quickly building toward another climax. He sped up his rhythm a little and watched her eyes glaze over with pleasure. As soon as he heard her soft scream in his ear, he began pumping into her in earnest, quickly finding his own fulfillment. He collapsed next to her, gathering her into his arms, pillowing her head on his shoulder. He couldn't stop stroking her back, her cheek. "Are you okay?" "I can't believe we just did that," she whispered with a blush. He laughed. "You'd better believe it, because we're going to be doing a lot of it." She snuggled her cheek in deeper against his shoulder. "I think if you keep giving me those soft kisses, I'll be your slave forever." He leaned down and very gently brushed his lips against hers. "This kind of kiss?" "Oh yeah." Chapter 3. Katie had slept little since she had made the decision to marry, so she dozed in Ryan's arms easily. She woke to his soft kisses, and his hands stroking her hair. Katie had never been a woman who hugged or who was constantly touching other people, and the one other person who had touched her a lot in her adulthood was Emma. It was strange for her to wake to a man touching her and kissing her. Nice, but strange. When her eyes fluttered open, he whispered, "Hi." "Hi. Are you getting hungry?" She lay there for a moment and took stock. Her body ached in strange places. She was still sleepy. But yes, she was hungry too. "Yeah, I'm hungry." He smiled. "Me, too. Do you want to get dressed and go down to dinner in the restaurant here, or order room service?" She didn't think it was a good idea for her to stay in a room naked with him. She just wouldn't be able to keep her hands off of him. His body was even nicer than she'd imagined. She was in this marriage for Emma, and it wouldn't do for him to guess the depths of her feelings for him. "Let's get dressed and go down to dinner," she said. "Okay," he said. "As long as I know you're coming back up here and getting naked with me later." She blushed. "I have a feeling that's going to happen." She hugged the sheet to her while he got out of bed and dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. She watched him, loving the way his body moved. "Do you mind something casual for dinner? They have a formal restaurant and a couple of casual ones here. I'm thinking pizza sounds really good." "I could go for pizza," she said, still hiding under the sheet. He walked into the sitting area of the suite and grabbed her suitcase for her. "Here. I have a feeling you're going to hide under that sheet until I go away. I'll go wait for you out there." "Thanks," she said. "No problem. Although, I have felt every single inch of you, and plan on doing it again soon. You're going to have to get used to me seeing you naked." He slipped from the room while she thought about that. He was right. It was silly to be embarrassed, but she couldn't help herself. 6 hours ago, she'd never been kissed. Now she was being told she needed to get used to being naked around a man. That was a little too quick in her book. She took her suitcase into the bathroom with her, and did her best to wash herself without taking a full bath. She quickly dressed and met him in the sitting room. He leaned over and kissed her, then grabbed her hand. "Pizza." She followed along beside him, dressed in jeans and a nice blouse. She'd brought a couple changes of clothes, because she wasn't sure just what he'd had in mind with this hotel stay. They were the only people in the elevator, and he leaned down to kiss her. "I just can't seem to stop touching you," he told her. "That's probably a good thing," she said. "Why is that?" he asked as he industriously nibbled on her neck. "No one will ever guess that you married me for Emma, and pity me." "Or pity me, because you married me for Emma," he told her. She laughed. "Yeah, right." He frowned down at her as the elevator opened. She didn't see herself the way he did. As they walked toward the pizza place, she saw the woman who had stopped him earlier for his autograph. She was beautiful, and exactly the sort of woman that Katie had always envisioned Ryan with. When she approached them, Katie tried to stay back and let Ryan talk to her. Ryan locked his arm firmly around her shoulders and held her to him. The woman walked over, looked Katie up and down, and quickly dismissed her. "I can't believe I'm staying at the same hotel as Ryan Summers." Ryan smiled at her and kept walking toward the restaurant. "I can't wait to tell all my friends I saw you here," she simpered. "My name is Danny, by the way." "Nice to meet you, Danny," Ryan responded. "This is my wife, Katie." "Wife?" Danny asked, astounded. "But you aren't married." Ryan kissed the top of Katie's head. "As of this afternoon I am." The woman stopped and stared. "You've got to be kidding me." "Why would I be kidding?" he asked dangerously. "She doesn't seem at all your type," Danny said. "Beautiful, intelligent, loving?" "What's not my type about that?" he asked. "Excuse me, but it's my wedding night, and I just want to have dinner and spend some time alone with my bride. I'm sure you can understand that." Katie waited until they were seated to speak. "You didn't have to do that." "I didn't?" he asked. "I'm sure she'd have been willing to do anything you wanted." "Katie, I don't think you understand. I'm here with you. You are my wife. You are the woman I will be going to bed with for as long as we're married. The only woman I'm going to be going to bed with. You're the only woman I want to go to bed with." Katie looked down at her hands. "I'm sure you'd have a lot more fun with someone who knows what they're doing than you do with me." I had no desire at all to be around that woman. You, my wide-eyed wife, are a different story. I can't touch you or even look at you without going hard. Katie blushed. "So what kind of pizza do you like?" Nice subject change. "Don't worry, I'll show you what I mean when we get back upstairs," he whispered. After they'd eaten, he invited her to dance with him on the small dance floor in the darkened restaurant. She shook her head. "Come on. We've only ever danced once, and you wouldn't even look at me. This time, I want to hold you close and stare into your eyes. I want to think about how it feels when I slide inside you, and have you thinking about the same thing." "Ryan," she whispered, a little shocked. "Think about it on the dance floor while I hold you close." He took her hand and pulled her to the dance floor. Taking her in his arms, he put his finger under her chin and tilted it up so that their eyes met. "There we are, beautiful. Now think about it." She blushed, unable to think about anything else. Her body felt warm where they touched. As they danced, his hips pressed against her abdomen. She could feel how hard he was already. All she could think about was getting back upstairs. Slowly, he lowered his head to meet hers. The kiss he pressed to her lips was so sweet, she held her breath. "Take me upstairs, Ryan." He smiled into her eyes. "I thought you'd never ask." He wrapped his arm around her, and they made their way back to the elevator. There were others in the elevator with them, and she was annoyed that she couldn't begin kissing him right away. By the time they were back inside their suite, she felt like she was burning up inside. She grabbed his hand and pulled him into the bedroom. He stood still while she stared at him. "You've got me here. Now what are you going to do with me?" he asked with a smile. She'd been waiting for him to start something, but obviously he was waiting for her to make the first move this time. Could she? She pulled his head down and tried to give the same kind of soft kiss that he was so good at. She pressed her lips to his. It just didn't feel quite the same. So she tried again. This time she leaned forward and barely touched her lips against his, just a slow brush. That was it. She heard his breath catch. She played with his lips the way he'd played with hers all afternoon. Soft kisses, sometimes with a little tongue, sometimes just barely a brush of lips. She found the hem of his t-shirt and pushed it up so that she could run her hands over his chest. "I love the way you feel," she whispered against his lips. Pulling her mouth away, she pushed the shirt over his head before leaning in again for another soft kiss. She remembered what he'd said about how it felt when he slid inside her. She was very interested in his anatomy, but hadn't been given the opportunity to touch it yet. He was insisting she take charge this time, however, so she could touch what she wanted. She slid her hands down his hard stomach to the fly on his jeans. She felt him suck in his breath in surprise, but he just licked his lips in response. Slowly, she teased the button out of the hole and unzipped his jeans. She caught his boxers with his jeans and she pushed both to the floor, urging him to step out. He kicked off his shoes and did as she wanted. She stepped closer to him and felt him pushing urgently against her belly as she kissed him. She moved her hands from his well-defined shoulders and chest, down his stomach, to his member. She slowly filled her hand with it and stroked her fingers along the length of him. It felt amazing, like steel encased in velvet. Her fingers went to the tip that was already damp, and he shuddered before pulling her hands away. Suddenly his hands were all over her. He unbuttoned her shirt and threw it to the floor. Her jeans followed quickly. When she was clad in only panties and a bra, his fingers caressed her bare skin. He found her breasts through her bra and brought her sensitive flesh to tight peaks. She pressed closer to feel him pressing against her bare belly again. He stripped off her underwear and quickly picked her up and laid her on the bed. Following her down, he lay between her legs with his member at her entrance. Leaning down, he kissed her softly as he started moving inside her. Pulling his head back, he watched her eyes glaze as he moved inside slowly. "This is all I've been able to think about since you said that, how good it feels to have you slip inside me," she whispered. "I know," he said. "Me too." He slid all the way in, then very slowly pulled all the way out, leaving only the very tip of himself inside her. Again and again he repeated that, until she was begging him to go faster. He sped up the rhythm, and heard her breath break in climax almost immediately. He followed quickly, collapsing to her side, hugging her close. "Why did you say that in the restaurant, knowing that it would take us so long to get upstairs and do something about how turned on it made us?" she asked. "I thought the anticipation might make it even better," he whispered. "Did it?" "Oh yeah." She dropped a kiss to his shoulder. "Katie?" "Yeah?" "You're beautiful, and making love with you is the most incredible thing I've ever experienced in my life," he said. She blushed, but happily snuggled closer. "I could get used to it. I only wish we had time to take a full week-long honeymoon to ourselves." "Me too, but it wouldn't be fair to Emma," she whispered. "I am glad we have tonight, though. You were right about the hotel. I don't think I'd have been able to do this in my brother's house." "Well, I think I could now, but not for the first time, if that makes sense." "It does." He stroked her cheek with his hand. "I'm glad your first time was with me." "Me too. I can't imagine there's anyone else that kisses like you," she said dreamily. "Just don't start running around kissing other men, trying to find out." She yawned. "I won't." "Good." Katie woke the following morning held firmly in Ryan's arms. She was startled at first by the arm pinning her down, but gradually became aware of where she was and why. Opening her eyes, she saw that Ryan was still sleeping. Propping herself up on her elbow, she lay watching him sleep. He looked so young, lying with his head turned toward her, a half-smile on his face as he slept. The bedside clock told her it was only 6:30, so she didn't want to wake him. She knew she could happily watch him sleep for hours if that's how long she had. Her only problem was that he was covered to the shoulders with the blanket. She wanted a more unobstructed view. Very slowly, she moved her hand to push the cover down to his waist. Her eyes followed the path she'd uncovered, and she gazed openly at his body. He looked as good as he had all those years ago in his movies. Seeing made her want to touch, but she didn't want to wake him. Her eyes traveled slowly back up his body, taking in those magnificently well-defined shoulders, the thick neck, the beautiful brown eyes watching her. "Morning," he whispered, kissing her softly. She spread her hand across his chest and kissed him back. "Morning. How long have you been awake?" he asked. "Only about 10 minutes, she said as she blushed. "You?" "Ever since you started uncovering me," he replied with a grin. She buried her face in his shoulder so he wouldn't see her embarrassment. "Sorry. I'm not," he laughed. "I'm glad you like my body. I like yours so much that if you didn't like mine, we'd be having some trouble." She had never been able to think of her body as something someone would like. She'd been overweight until her junior year in college, when she had started spending time with a gym rat sweet mate. She'd learned all the right things to do to get her weight under control. She'd never liked doing it, but she certainly knew how, and worked hard at maintaining her body now. In spite of her hard work, though, she still thought of herself as the fat girl from high school. He smoothed his hand over her hair. "How sore are you?" he asked. Blushing, she thought about that. "I'm not too sore to walk, but I'm pretty sore." He sighed. "I was afraid of that. There go my plans for the morning's activities." "Running a marathon?" she asked mischievously. "No, but we definitely would have gotten hot and sweaty." He threw his legs over the side of the bed. Her eyes followed his every move, amazed that she had the right to look at this man she'd been fantasizing about for almost half of her life. "I'm going to go and fill the jacuzzi, and we'll soak together. Maybe that will help ease some of the soreness," he told her. "You don't have to get in with me. I'm sure you have better things to do." He laughed. "You actually think I have better things to do than take a bath with my wife? Are you crazy?" She watched as he left the room for the sitting area and the huge tub. She ran for the bathroom, taking care of necessities, brushing her teeth, and donning a robe while she was in there. She walked out to join him in the sitting room. He hadn't bothered with a robe, and was still walking around unashamedly naked as he waited for the tub to fill. "The bathroom's all yours if you want it," she said, her shyness making her quiet. He dropped a quick kiss onto her lips as he left the room. She quickly stepped into the tub, turned the water off and the bubbles on while he was gone. The bubbles didn't conceal her completely, but they helped. When Ryan came back into the room, he carried 2 towels with him. He dropped them both at the edge of the tub, and stepped in to sit down next to her. "How is the water feeling?" "Fabulous," she sighed. He draped his arm across her shoulders and pulled her into his side, kissing the top of her head. "Good. Just relax, and let it do its work." "Relax?" she squeaked. "Yeah, relax." "How do you expect me to relax while I'm sitting in a tub with a naked man who is touching me?" she asked him. "You're going to have to get used to me touching you, whether you're naked or not. I'm going to be touching you all the time. Then you're going to have to get used to me being a little tense about it." Chapter 4. They stopped at a Mexican restaurant on the way back to the house. Once they'd ordered, Katie brought up everything they still had to do that week. Leah is going to watch Emma for the week, and her mom said she can do it at their house or Dave and Anna's, she told him. "What hours does she usually watch her?" he asked. "From 8 to 4. I was thinking it might be good if we dropped her off at Leah's. That way we'll be able to get more of the packing done." He nodded as he bit into a chip. "I might be able to lure you back into bed during the day while she's gone, as well." She blushed. "While that's incredibly tempting, I think we need to focus on getting the house emptied." I don't think you want Emma, and I have to stay here while you go back to Ranger by yourself. That's not happening, he told her. You're not spending your nights in a lonely bed. You'd miss me too much. Since I've never slept with anyone before last night, I'm not so sure about that, but I think maybe I could get used to having you around. He laughed. You don't have much choice there, Katie. She shook her head at him and returned to the subject at hand. So you agree that it would be best if Emma spent the days at Leah's, but the nights with us for this week? Yeah, that sounds good. If we don't get everything done before Sunday morning when we need to head home to Ranger, we can come back on weekends until it is done. I'd rather just have it over, though, Ryan said, shaking his head sadly. Katie nodded and dashed away a tear. I know. I feel the same way. I lost my brother and the closest thing I've ever had to a sister in the same day. It's tough. I'm glad we still have Emma. He covered her hand with his. I almost feel guilty for rushing you into marriage so quickly and not giving you time to grieve for them, but we needed to do it to give Emma a home. I know. It helps to know that you were grieving with me, she said quietly. By the time they arrived home, it was almost time for Leah to walk over with Emma. Katie began a load of laundry, and then began sorting through some of the things in the master bedroom. Ryan had been staying in here since his arrival, and she was sure he'd want her in there with him this evening. For her to be able to even think about sleeping in there, she needed to have as few personal reminders of her brother and his wife as possible. She boxed up all of Dave and Anna's clothes, planning on calling a local charity to come and get them in the morning. They'd decided to sell the furniture and use the money to set up a college fund for Emma, but the clothing was just too personal for Katie to be able to bear selling. It was easier for her to not even think about what she was doing as she quickly boxed it up, labeling it all for pickup. She blushed as she reached Anna's lingerie drawer. She had known on one level that her brother and his wife had been very much in love and must have had an active sex life, but seeing this absolute reminder of that fact was a bit of a shock to her. It also made her think about her own lack of sexy nightwear. Ryan probably expected her to wear this type of thing sometimes, and she had nothing that would even begin to be enticing. She picked up the phone before she lost her nerve and called her closest college friend. Beth? I need some help. She continued packing while she talked. She and Beth made plans to spend a couple of hours together the following morning to do some quick lingerie shopping, and she felt a little better. Ryan came looking for her as she packed up the last box. How's it coming in here? I've got all the clothes boxed up and ready to go. Would you mind carrying them to the garage for me? Not a problem. He glanced at his watch. It's 4:15. Should we worry that Emma and Leah aren't here yet? Probably not. I'm sure her mom told her to keep her a little longer to give us a bit more time alone together. I'll call, she told him. He dropped a kiss on her lips and started carrying the boxes she'd indicated out to the garage. As she was walking toward the kitchen to get Leah's phone number off the refrigerator, the doorbell rang. Opening the door, she grinned widely as Emma launched herself at her. Hi, Princess. Did you have a good night? I got to sleep with Leah in her room, so it was just like having a slumber party, and it was great. Emma began chattering nonstop. Katie glanced over at Leah. Leah was a dark-haired, slender girl of 15. She'd been sitting for Emma for over a year, and the two were very attached to one another. Was it just as great for Leah? Leah laughed and rubbed her eyes. I'm tired, but it was good. We had fun. Katie smiled. I'm glad. We're going to be dropping Emma off at 8 every morning this week. We'll get a lot more of the packing done with her there instead of here. Do you need to raid her room for toys or books or anything? Nah. I've got nieces, so we've got the whole setup. Emma and I will be fine. Leah looked around. Where's Ryan? He's carrying boxes to the garage for me. He's so hot. Leah whispered. Katie grinned. I know. I keep pinching myself to see if I'm dreaming. Leah laughed. I would be too. I can't imagine being married to someone who looks that good. Emma ran back into the room. Aunt Katie. Yes, Emma? Are we going to work on packing my room some more tonight? Katie nodded. One box every night until it's time to go. We'll leave all your favorite things for the last night. Emma nodded. When we move to Uncle Ryan's house, will he have a toy room for me? Yes, Emma. He said we'd have a toy room, Katie replied. Okay, I'll go pick out what I want to pack today. Katie laughed. You do that. She looked back at Leah. I'll drop her off in the morning. Would it be better if I walked over to get her? Leah asked. Nah, I can use the walk. I'll see you then. Bye. Leah said, closing the door behind her as she went out. Once Emma was tucked in for the night, Katie finished packing the last of the things in Dave and Anna's bedroom. She put the jewelry into a box to be moved with them for Emma, and threw away the last of the makeup. When she was finished, she sat down on the side of the bed, and looked around at the barren room. She wasn't sure if she was glad the job was done, or sad because all of the remnants of the people she loved were gone. Ryan came in and found her sitting that way. He took her hand and brought it to his lips. I know how hard this is for you. It is, but it has to be done. I wish I could have waited a month or two, but that's just not practical. No, it's not. He waited for a moment before saying anything else. I finished up the office as well. Thanks. I guess I'll get started on the kitchen tomorrow. After that, other than mine and Emma's room, there's not a whole lot of stuff left to pack up. It's mostly just the furniture. He nodded. We should be done in plenty of time. Slipping an arm around her, he drew her close and kissed her cheek. Are you ready for bed? I want to get a shower and brush my teeth yet, but after that I will be. It shouldn't take me long. She slipped off the bed and went off to her own room and the adjoining bath. She hadn't seen a need to move her clothes for the couple of nights they'd still be here. She showered and shaved quickly, blow-drying her hair when she was finished. She felt frumpy in her old, worn nightgown, but knew that situation would be rectified tomorrow. For now, she'd just have to put up with what she had. She slipped into the master bedroom, her eyes searching for Ryan. He wasn't there. She went to pull back the covers, and heard him come out of the adjoining bath. He was towel-drying his hair, but otherwise naked. She started to get into bed, but he stopped her by taking hold of her arm. It's just going to be harder to get that thing off of you after you're in bed, Katie. How about if I take it off you now, to make it easier on both of us in a minute? She swallowed hard, staring into his eyes. He leaned down to kiss her softly. You're not still nervous, are you? She laughed. You don't think I'm going to get over my nervousness in a day, do you? I'll probably still be nervous a month from now. He sighed. I sure hope not. How can I convince you that you're beautiful, that making love to you is the best thing that I can possibly think of doing? I really don't think you can, but I wouldn't mind if you tried again, she said timidly. He framed her face in his hands and began kissing her softly again. He touched her nowhere but her face. His lips played with hers until she'd plastered herself against him. He drew her gown over her head before gently pushing her down onto the bed. Her hands moved over him frantically. He kissed a trail down her neck, then moved his mouth lower to gently run his tongue over the tip of her breast. When she gasped, he smiled into her eyes as he slowly drew the hard nub into his mouth. She kneaded his shoulders as she panted for breath, her core hot and wet and ready for him. "Please, Ryan," she whispered, trying to drag his mouth back up to hers, to pull him fully atop her. "Please what?" he asked. "Please come inside me." She blushed as she said the words. He groaned and settled himself between her thighs. "Like this?" "Oh yeah. Just like that." The head of his member slowly started to press into her entrance. She was so enthralled with what he was doing, she almost didn't hear the sounds coming from outside the bedroom. He obviously didn't hear it. She put a hand on his shoulder to stop him. "Wait." There it was again. Emma was screaming. Another nightmare. She pushed against his shoulder, and he rolled to her side, panting. She jumped from the bed and pulled on her discarded nightgown, running from the room and down the hall. By the time he'd pulled on a pair of shorts and followed her, she was sitting on Emma's bed with her, rocking her gently back and forth. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here. I'm here." Emma sobbed. "Mama. I want my mama." "I know, baby. I know. I want her, too." Ryan stood silently watching, unsure what to do to help. Both had tears streaming down their faces. He dropped to his knees beside the bed and gathered them both in his arms. "Shoo," he whispered as he held them. It took 20 minutes to get Emma quieted down enough to go back to sleep. Katie lay with her on the bed, holding her for another 10, to make sure she wouldn't wake up again. Finally, Katie and Ryan tiptoed back down the hall to the master bedroom. Katie sat down on the side of the bed and buried her face in her hands. "I'm sorry, Ryan." He knelt on the floor in front of her. "You have nothing to be sorry for." "I can't believe I didn't hear her." "Thank God you did." She's not doing it as often as she did at first. She seems so well adjusted during the day, and then in the middle of the night it just comes out. "That's only the third time it's happened since you got here." "That's happened since I've been here?" he asked, shocked. "Yeah. You must be a really sound sleeper." "Of course, my room is right next to hers, so it's probably just easier for me to hear her," she said. "Should we sleep in there, just in case this happens again?" "I would prefer that, if it's okay with you. It's not nearly as big, and we'd be cramped into a double bed, but I'd feel so much safer." "I don't mind being cramped," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "You know what? Why don't we just make love in here, and then I'll go sleep in there when we're done. Then you can still have a nice big room. We don't have to actually sleep in the same bed." He looked at her like she was crazy. "I'm not going to just make love to you and send you away. I'm going to sleep with you all night long." "I wouldn't mind," she whispered. "I would." "Okay." She led him down the hallway to her room, and turned on the light while he stripped off the shorts and climbed under the covers. She shut off the light, dropped her nightgown on the floor, and slipped into bed with him. He pulled her into his arms, and kissed her softly on the mouth. "Good night, love." "Good night?" "But, I thought." "I know what you thought. Sleeping together is more than just making love. I want you to know that I want to sleep with you even when we don't make love." She could feel his erection pressing into her hip. "But, I can feel you." "Oh yeah, I'm sure you can." He kissed her again. "Go to sleep." She snuggled closer, and closed her eyes. Why would he want to sleep with her if he wasn't going to make love to her? It just didn't make sense, but she was simply too tired to worry about it. He lay awake long after she'd fallen asleep, listening to her breathing. He wondered if he was an idiot for not making love to her. Would she even understand that he was respecting her and showing her that he just enjoyed being near her, with or without sexual gratification? Probably not. He determined there and then to make her understand that she was more than a sexual outlet for him. More than just a means to an end. Chapter 5. After walking Emma to Leah's house the following morning, Katie went home to pack the kitchen. They'd been mostly eating out anyway, and she knew they would probably continue that trend until they were in Ranger. She packed everything to move with them. Anna had always laughed at Ryan for his lack of cooking skills and poorly equipped kitchen. She knew that many of the things that she packed, they would need. She was meeting Beth at the mall at 10, so she stepped into the garage where Ryan was packing to let him know her plans. "I'm going to be meeting a friend at the mall and having lunch with her. I should be back by 1 at the latest." Ryan nodded. "Okay. I think I can live that long without you beside me. I'm sure you won't even notice I'm gone. Do you need anything while I'm out?" "I'm good. Have fun with your friend." He walked over and dropped a quick kiss on her lips. "Think about me while you're gone." "I'll do that." Asterisk. When Katie got to the mall, she found her friend waiting for her at the entrance they'd agreed to meet at. Beth had been the one to introduce her to the gym and teach her how to eat right. "You still look great." "Thanks to you." "No, you did all the work yourself." Beth linked arms with her and they walked toward the entrance to the mall. "Now, tell me about this guy you married." When Katie didn't start talking right away, Beth laughed. "You know, I'm really kind of shocked that you were able to get over your crush on Ryan Summers long enough to see someone else. I mean, you'd watch his movies over and over, and your eyes would just glaze over. I swear, I thought you'd be single your whole life, because you'd never be able to look past the image you had of him to see anyone else." Katie blushed. Beth? I married Ryan Summers." Beth stopped in the middle of the mall. "You've got to be kidding me." "Well, you know his sister and my brother were married, so I kind of knew him. He really only married me for our niece." She explained everything that had happened in the last couple of weeks. "If he only married you because of your niece, why are you buying lingerie?" "I mean, if it's only for your niece, he'll never see it, right?" Katie nodded. "That's what I thought. I figured we'd have separate bedrooms and all, but he wants it to look as real as it can so she feels more secure." Beth eyed her skeptically. "You honestly think that a hunk like Ryan Summers is having sex with you to make your niece feel more secure? What other reason would he have?" "Get real, Beth." Beth sighed. "Have you looked in a mirror even once in the last 2 years? Are you still that delusional about how you look?" "I know exactly how I look." "Tell me this. What happens if you get pregnant?" "I mean, no birth control is foolproof." Katie blinked a few times. "Birth control? I never even thought about that. We haven't even been using birth control." Beth laughed. "Yeah, he's just married to you for your niece, all right." She waited for Katie to say something. "So what's he like in bed?" "Beth. Come on, Katie. You can tell me." Katie blushed. "I couldn't even begin to answer that. No one to compare him with, remember?" Beth poked her. "You can at least tell me if you like it." "It's amazing." End of subject. Let's go buy me some lingerie." They spent the morning shopping, and then had lunch together. By the time they sat down to eat, she had 12 new bra and panty sets and 5 negligées. "He's not going to know what to think when I start wearing stuff that's meant to look good, and not meant to just cover me up," she told Beth. "When he's done swallowing his tongue, he'll figure it out." Katie grinned. "Thanks for your help. I appreciate you giving up one of your beautiful summer days off to help me." Beth smiled. "Just be glad it was summer. When school starts up again, and I'm back to coaching, I'll have time for nothing. I'm not planning on changing my cell phone number, so you'll still be able to reach me anytime." We officially move on Sunday morning. It's hard to believe how fast my life is changing. I'll miss you, but it will be fun to have a new place to visit on school breaks. You'll always be welcome, Katie said emphatically. Asterisk. When Katie pulled up in front of the house, she saw the truck for the charity was there, and some men were loading the boxes of clothes. One more thing was out of the way. She slipped in the front while Ryan supervised the men, and put away the new clothing she'd bought. She wanted to surprise him by wearing one of her favorite purchases that night. He knocked on her door, just as she'd stuffed the bag into the bottom of her trash can. Come in. They just got it all hauled off, he told her, going to sit on the side of her bed. Oh, good. For some reason, the clothes were the hardest thing for me. I'm not sure why. He held out a hand to her, and she went to stand between his spread knees. Did you have a good time with your friend this morning? She nodded. She was a sweet mate of mine in college. We try to see each other every month or two. He pulled her down onto his lap. We'll try to make sure we still get into the cities every few months so you can see your friends. She's the only one I'm worried about seeing. I hope it's okay, but I told her she was welcome to visit us on school breaks. She's a high school volleyball coach, she told him. Of course it's okay. It's your home now too, he said against her neck. His hand went to her breast as his arm pulled her in closer. She turned her head to him and offered her lips. His soft kisses, the ones she'd dreamed about for so long, had become an addiction. She'd rather have his kisses than chocolate, and that was amazing. Mere moments later, they were both naked and making love. Afterward, she lay in his arms, thinking about her conversation with Beth that morning. There's something we haven't talked about, she said quietly. What's that? He asked, his hand stroking her back. Birth control, she said blushing. I'm certainly not on it. I've never needed to be. You haven't been using anything. Do you want me to? He asked. Well, I never really thought about it until today. I mean, I like kids, and I always wanted some. But if our marriage isn't permanent, is it a good idea to bring kids into it? Ryan sighed. I'm certainly not counting down the days until we can split up. I like you. I like being with you. I want children. Why don't we just leave it be and see what happens? You wouldn't mind if I got pregnant? She asked, dumbfounded. If I did, I'd have used protection. I've never been with a woman without using protection. Not before you. You're my wife, and if we have a baby, then we have a baby. You'll make a wonderful mother. She leaned forward and kissed him. Okay. He smiled. Emma needs to have cousins to play with anyway. Will you be disappointed if we don't have a baby right away? She asked. Of course not. That will only mean that I get to try harder, he whispered and began kissing her again. Asterisk. That night, after tucking Emma into bed, she slipped into the bathroom for her shower, and took her new red silk negligee with her. It was designed simply, with spaghetti straps, and ended at the top of her thighs. After drying her hair and giving herself a confidence-boosting pep talk, she stepped out into her bedroom. Ryan was already waiting in bed for her. He was reading a book, and glanced up with a vacant smile. He looked back at the book, then his eyes widened and he stared back at her. He swallowed hard. Is that what you went shopping for today? He asked. Do you like it? Oh yeah. I love it. He dropped the book he'd been reading on the floor, holding the covers up so she could climb into bed beside him. He pulled her to him and began stroking her. You're not going to be wearing it for more than another minute, but I love it. She laughed. I don't think it's meant to be worn for long. Just so you realize, that doesn't mean I don't like it, he said against her neck. Afterward, as she lay snuggled against his side, he whispered, thank you. For what? She asked. For making an effort to do something to make our lovemaking more enjoyable. Until you wore that for me, I almost felt like you were making love with me only because I was insisting on it. Now I feel like you want it as much as I do, he told her. She raised herself on an elbow and looked down at him. Ryan, I'm startled to find myself in this position. Married. Making love on a regular basis. But I love it. I love touching you, and being touched by you. I still feel shy about it, but that's not because I don't enjoy it. I love you, she added silently. He pulled her back into his arms for another kiss. That's exactly what I needed to hear. I mean, I don't think I could keep my hands off you, regardless. But it's always nice to know that a woman can't keep her hands off me, either. She settled into his side for sleep. It was shocking to hear that he worried about how she felt as well. How could he feel self-conscious? He had an entire generation of women panting after him. Asterisk. By Sunday morning, everything was packed for their trip and they were ready to go. Katie didn't have a car, having chosen to use public transportation while she was in college, and not needing one since her graduation the year prior. They'd decided to keep Anna's minivan, and she was driving that out to Ranger, following along behind Ryan in his sports car. They'd packed up both vehicles with the things they decided needed to be moved immediately, and the rest of the belongings to be moved would be following in a truck with paid movers on Monday. Katie popped her head into the back seat and made sure that Emma was buckled up well. Her bag of toys was within easy reach, and she was equipped with a sippy cup of water. She climbed into the front seat and buckled up. She'd borrowed the van multiple times and felt perfectly comfortable driving it, but she'd never taken Emma on a long trip before. She'd ridden along with Dave and Anna as they'd taken her, but never been the one driving. Ryan walked over to check on them both. Are we going to need to stop for gas right away, or can you make it to the other side of FT Worth? The prices tend to drop once we get out to the Weatherford area. Katie started the van and checked the gas gauge. I've got 3/4 of a tank. That should just about get me to Ranger, shouldn't it? We'll still stop in Weatherford. I don't want to cut it too close. He glanced back at Emma. You ready, Emmalicious? Ready, Uncle Ryan. He opened Katie's door and kissed her quickly. Follow me. Keep your cell phone turned on. I hate that we can't drive this together. Katie smiled. I think Emma and I can handle ourselves. Just don't lose us. As she watched Ryan walk to his car, she slipped a CD of a book she'd wanted to read into the CD player. Emma had a portable DVD player on her lap and headphones to put on. 1 gas station, 2 potty breaks, and 2.5 hours later, they arrived in Ranger. She followed Ryan through the town, taking in the buildings and trying to memorize where everything was so she would be able to go where she needed to go without a lot of directions. He pulled into a steep driveway in front of what seemed to be the largest house in Ranger. It was a 2-story, white brick house that looked too modern to be in this quaint little town. The lawn was neatly trimmed, and the whole house looked inviting. Ryan told her that it had been custom built about 10 years ago, but the family it had been built for hated living in Ranger and moved back to the city within a year. It had stood vacant for a few years before Ryan moved in. It was on the outskirts of town, and she could see that it had the acreage he had promised. Part of the yard was fenced in with a chain-link fence, which would make it easier for her when Emma played outside. She parked beside him and set the parking brake. Emma squealed happily and unbuckled herself from her car seat. We're here. We're here. Shutting off the van, Katie got out slowly, looking around her carefully. She opened the back door to let Emma out to run free. Ryan walked over to meet them, laughing at the way Emma was spinning on the grass, happy to be out of the van after her hours of captivity. Katie flexed her tired shoulders as she looked up at the house, wondering what it would be like inside. Katie opened the back of the van to carry the suitcases inside, but Ryan said, "I'll get them in a bit. I want to show you around the house first." Katie nodded and followed along behind him. Emma saw them heading inside and ran after them. After he'd opened the door, Ryan turned to Katie and grinned. He scooped her up into his arms, to Emma's delighted squeal. "Ryan, put me down. I'm carrying my bride over the threshold," he told her. Emma began to squeal. "Me next. Me next, Uncle Ryan." Ryan laughed down at her. "I'll be right back out to carry you in, Emma. Just let me get Aunt Katie in first." He carried her into an entryway that opened into what looked like a living area. Kissing her gently, he set her on her feet. "Don't move. I want to show you around, but I have to go get Emma." Katie smiled to herself. Emma stood waiting impatiently outside the door. Ryan swept her up in his arms the same way he had Katie. The little girl's giggles were infectious. He kissed Emma's cheek and set her down on the floor next to Katie. "Now, may I give my ladies the grand tour?" he asked. Katie looked down at Emma's shining face. "Shall we let him give us the tour, Emma?" Emma jumped up and down and clapped her hands. "Yes. Since it pleases Princess Emma, we will take your tour," Katie told him formally. He held out his arm for Katie to take, and held his other hand down for Emma. "This is the living area, my ladies. Notice the large screen TV, and the comfortable seating areas." The living room was furnished with the necessities, but it was obvious that he hadn't spent a lot of time decorating. The wall was absent of any art. Everywhere she looked, she could see how things would look after she had spent some time on them. They went from room to room, with Ryan giving the formal tour. As they went through the kitchen, Katie looked in the cabinets and dug in the refrigerator, making mental notes of what she'd need to stock right away. The food situation wouldn't last more than a few hours unless she and Emma decided to live on canned chili for a while. The bedrooms were located on the second floor. The room closest to the master bedroom was being used as an office, but Katie decided that she would talk to Ryan about turning that into a bedroom for Emma. She wanted her as close as possible. The nightmares had slowed down, but still hadn't stopped, and she was a little worried that they would be worse in the unfamiliar surroundings. As soon as the tour was over, Katie made a list of what she felt they needed right away from the grocery store, while Emma helped Ryan carry in their suitcases. After the van was unloaded, she asked Ryan for directions to the nearest grocery store. Thankfully, there was one right there in Ranger, so she wouldn't have to venture far. Leaving Emma with Ryan, Katie left to pick up the items they'd need to get them through their first few days at home. They'd have to live mainly on sandwiches and other simple things, because Ryan had very little in the way of pots and pans, or any other cooking utensils for that matter. Most of the people in the store at least stopped to say hi to her. She was amazed at the friendliness of the small-town people. One woman in particular started up a conversation with her. The woman was tall and curvy in all the right ways. She made Katie feel lacking in every way. "So are you here visiting someone, or are you moving here?" the woman asked. She didn't seem friendly so much as on a quest for information about the newcomer. "My niece and I just moved here from Dallas this morning," Katie told her. "Well, it's nice to meet you. I'm Mary Beth. Just think of me as the welcoming committee. I'm Katie. I don't know how much you know about our little town yet, Katie, but we actually have a real celebrity living here. I'm sure you've heard of Ryan Summers?" Mary Beth asked. "Of course," Katie answered. She started to tell him that she and Ryan were married. Mary Beth quickly cut her off. "He lives right here in Ranger. I'm going to be marrying him. If you want, I'll introduce you, but don't get any ideas," she laughed as she tossed her red hair over her shoulder. "He's most definitely mine." Katie's jaw dropped. Oh, are you two engaged? She looked down at Mary Beth's hand, but didn't see a ring. Ryan hadn't said anything about seeing anyone in Ranger. Maybe it hadn't been serious, but she still would have liked to have been forewarned before running into his girlfriend in the local grocery store. Not yet, but I don't think it's going to be long before he gets up the gumption to ask, she said. I was Miss Texas a few years back, and everyone here knows that he's mine. I see, Katie said softly. Well, I need to be finishing up. She started walking away, wondering just how badly she and Emma had messed up Ryan's life. Where are you staying? You didn't say, Mary Beth asked. With my new husband, Katie said, as she walked away. New husband? A native of Ranger? Who? Mary Beth chased after her, not ready to let this juicy bit of gossip get away from her. Katie pretended she hadn't heard the question and kept walking. Mary Beth caught up with her. You have to tell me who. Ryan Summers, Katie mumbled as she stepped up to an empty checkout counter and began emptying her cart. You lying bitch. Mary Beth screamed at her, her eyes flashing. Mary Beth ran toward the front of the store, leaving her cart full of groceries sitting there. The cashier looked at Katie with wide eyes. What did you do to her? I told her that I just got married and moved here. The cashier sized her up slowly, and a twinkle came into her eye. Don't tell me. Ryan Summers? Did you marry Ryan Summers? Yes, I did. I didn't know he was seeing someone here, she mumbled, red-faced. Oh, this is fabulous, the woman squealed. I'm Cassie. I went to school with Mary Beth. No one can stand her. Not even her mother. She wasn't seeing Dr. Summers. She just wanted to be. She liked to throw herself at him, but he sure wasn't catching her. Cassie was of medium height, with mouse brown hair and the most stunningly blue eyes Katie had ever seen. She was plump, but the extra weight looked good on her in a way it never had on Katie. Are you sure? She's acting like I've ruined her plans for her entire life. Cassie laughed. She's a drama queen. How'd you like to be lifelong friends? I think you're my new favorite person in the whole world. You didn't get a wedding shower from the good women of Ranger, so I'm going to throw you one. Here. She shoved a piece of paper at Katie. Write your phone number down. I'll call you, and we'll get it set up. We'll have a blast. Katie stared at her, wide-eyed. I don't need a wedding shower. I have everything I could possibly need. Really? You may not, but we all need to meet you, and I can't think of a better excuse. We'll have a fill-your-freezer shower. We'll all bring over good, home-cooked meals so you won't have to mess with cooking for a while as you get used to having the good doctor wrapped around your little finger, Cassie said with a grin. But you don't even know me. Katie protested. I know you married a good man. I know you need a good welcome to our community. I know you're my lifelong friend. I'll call you. She finished ringing Katie up, and Katie paid for the groceries. As she left, Cassie called out, Don't forget that we're lifelong friends now, Mrs. Summers. I'll call you in a day or two. Katie turned back to Cassie, bemusedly. It's Katie. Please just call me Katie. As she walked to her car, she realized that she'd made a lifelong friend without even telling her what her first name was. Not that it seemed to matter.